Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing in the middle of a vast, silent forest. The year is 1590. The air smells of pine and ocean salt. The Atlantic wind brushes through the leaves above you. And somewhere ahead, through the trees, there should be a colony, 115 men, women, and children who sailed from England with hope in their hearts. But when you step into the clearing, there is nothing. No bodies, no graves, no signs of battle, no fire, no screaming, no blood, just silence, and carved into a single wooden post one word: Croatoan. That is where our journey begins tonight. Welcome to the hidden mysteries buried deep within the history of the United States of America. Stories that were never written into your textbooks. Secrets that governments locked away. Disappearances that were never solved. Conspiracies that were almost too dangerous to speak aloud. And truths so strange that history itself seems afraid to repeat them. Tonight, we are going to travel together slowly, gently, through the darkest corridors, the most forgotten rooms, and the most breathtaking mysteries of American history. From the vanished colony of Roanoke to the secret tunnels beneath the White House, from the coded messages of the Founding Fathers to the ghost ships that drifted silently into American ports. From the lost gold of the Civil War to the whispered legends of cities buried beneath American soil. So settle in, get comfortable, let your breathing slow, and allow the stories of a nation with all its wonders and all its shadows to carry you gently into the night. This is the history they never told you, and it begins right now. Chapter 1. The Vanished. The Lost Colony of Roanoke. The year is 1584. England, under the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, is hungry for power, hungry for land, and hungry for the riches that Spain had been pulling from the New World for nearly a century. Sir Walter Raleigh, a bold and brilliant explorer with fire in his eyes and silver on his tongue, convinces the Queen to grant him a charter to colonize a distant, wild, and largely unknown land across the Atlantic Ocean. The place they chose was a narrow strip of land along the coast of what we now call North Carolina. They named it Virginia, in honor of their Virgin Queen. And on that sliver of earth, on a place called Roanoke Island, they would attempt something that had never been done by the English before. They would build a home. The first expedition arrived in 1585. 108 soldiers and settlers. They built a fort. They planted crops. They attempted, cautiously, to make peace with the Algonquian people, the Croatoan and the Secotan, who had lived on that land for thousands of years. Some of those relationships were gentle, many were not. By 1586, the colony was struggling. Food was running short. Tensions with neighboring tribes had turned violent. When the famed explorer Sir Francis Drake arrived in the harbor by complete chance, on his way back from raiding Spanish settlements, the colonists begged to return to England with him. And so they did. Raleigh was undeterred. In 1587, he sent a second colony. This one was different. This was not a military expedition. This was a village. He sent families 117 men, women, and children. Their governor was a man named John White, a gifted artist and mapmaker who had been on the first expedition and believed in the dream of Roanoke with every fiber of his being. His own daughter, Eleanor, was among the colonists. She was pregnant. On the 18th of August, 1587, Eleanor White gave birth to a baby girl. The child was named Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. And for a brief, beautiful moment, history felt like it was being made. But the colony needed supplies. They were running short almost immediately. Reluctantly, Governor White agreed to sail back to England for resupply. He kissed his daughter goodbye. He held his granddaughter, tiny, fresh, new to the world, and he promised to return. He did not know it would be 3 years before he saw those shores again. When White arrived back in England, he walked straight into the building crisis of the Spanish Armada, that fearsome naval fleet assembled by King Philip II of Spain to invade England. Every ship in England was commandeered for the defense of the realm. White pleaded, begged, argued. He could not get back to Roanoke. The Armada was defeated in 1588. The crisis passed. But even then, the delays continued. Privateering missions, bureaucratic obstacles, storms at sea. It was not until August of 1593, long, agonizing years later, that John White finally set foot back on Roanoke Island. And what he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. The settlement was abandoned. The houses had been dismantled carefully, deliberately, not destroyed, not burned, not ransacked. The palisade fence remained, reinforced and solid, as if someone had taken time to strengthen it. White searched frantically for any sign, any message, any clue left for him. And then he found it, carved into the bark of a large post at the entrance to the fort. In neat, deliberate letters, the word Crotone, and on a nearby tree, carved just as carefully, C-R-O. White remembered the agreement he had made with the colonists before he left. If they moved, they were to carve their destination. If they were in distress, they were to carve a Maltese cross above the word. There was no cross. There was only the name, Croatoan, the name of a nearby island, present-day Hatteras Island, and the name of the friendly tribe that had lived there, led by a man named Manteo, who had been a steadfast friend and interpreter to the English since the very beginning. White was almost relieved. He believed they had moved south to live among Manteo's people. He wanted to sail to Croatoan Island immediately, but a violent storm was building on the horizon. His ship's captain refused to linger, and the fleet turned north, then east, and eventually back to England. John White never returned to America. He died in 1593, never knowing what had become of his daughter, his granddaughter, tiny Virginia Dare, or any of the 115 souls he had left behind. No confirmed trace of the lost colony of Roanoke has ever been found. Pause 3 seconds of silence and ambient wind sounds. Over the centuries, theories have multiplied like shadows at dusk. The most hopeful theory is also the most human, that the colonists, facing starvation and uncertainty, simply chose to assimilate. That they walked south to Croatoan Island, or west into the mainland, and chose to live among the Native Americans who had been kind to them. Several native tribes in the region, centuries later, spoke of ancestors with grey eyes, of people who wore English clothing, of stories passed down through generations of English men and women who had simply become part of the tribe. Archaeological digs at Hatteras Island in recent years have unearthed intriguing artifacts. A ring believed to be of European origin, copper pieces consistent with English metalwork, and earthenware that blends English and Native American styles. The story may not be one of tragedy, but of adaptation, of survival, of people who chose to become part of a new world in the most complete way imaginable. But we do not know. Not truly. Not yet. And so Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America, remains a ghost at the edge of history. A name carved into stone and legend. A mystery as wide and deep as the Atlantic that once swallowed her world whole. Chapter 2. The Secret Founders, Freemasonry, Symbols, and the Architecture of America. Pull a dollar bill from your pocket, or simply imagine one in your hand. Look at it. Really look at it. On one side, the portrait of George Washington gazes out with that familiar, stoic expression. But turn it over, and you will find something far stranger. On the left-hand side of the bill, there is a pyramid. Not a complete pyramid, but one with its capstone floating above it, separated from the body below. And inside that floating capstone, a single all-seeing eye, radiating beams of light in every direction. Below the pyramid, in Latin, Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages. Above it, Annuit Coeptis, he has favored our undertakings. These symbols were placed on the Great Seal of the United States in 1782, and they have been whispering their secrets ever since. The question that historians, conspiracy theorists, and curious citizens have asked for nearly 2.5 centuries is this: what exactly did the Founding Fathers believe in? What hidden philosophy shaped the architecture, both physical and spiritual, of the most powerful nation in the history of the world? The answer, or at least part of it, lies within the ancient and secretive brotherhood known as the Freemasons. Freemasonry is among the oldest fraternal organizations in the Western world, a society steeped in ritual, symbolism, and allegory, tracing its philosophical roots to the master builders of Solomon's Temple in ancient Jerusalem. By the 18th century, Masonic lodges had spread throughout Europe and the American colonies, attracting merchants, lawyers, military officers, and intellectuals, men who believed in reason, liberty, and a kind of sacred architecture for human civilization. Among the American Founding Fathers, the Masonic connections are striking and undeniable. George Washington was initiated as a Freemason in 1752 inches, Fredericksburg, Virginia, eventually rising to the rank of Master Mason. He was so committed to the Brotherhood that on the day he laid the cornerstone of the United States Capitol in 1793, he wore his full Masonic regalia, the white lambskin apron, the ceremonial sash, and performed the cornerstone ceremony according to ancient Masonic tradition. Benjamin Franklin, perhaps the most intellectually restless of all the founders, was not merely a member, he was a Grand Master of the Provincial Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. He was also a member of the famous Hellfire Club in France, a secretive gentleman's society notorious for its unconventional beliefs, and maintained deep connections with European Masonic networks throughout his time as America's ambassador to France. Paul Revere, the man who rode through the night crying that the British were coming, was a Master Mason and Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. John Hancock, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, James Polk, James Buchanan, Andrew Johnson, James Garfield, William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt, Howard Taft, Warren Harding, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Harry Truman, President after president after president initiated into the Brotherhood, bound by the same secret oaths, steeped in the same symbolism. But what did it mean for the nation they built? The layout of Washington, D.C. itself has long been a subject of fascination. Pierre-Charles L'Enfant, the French engineer commissioned by Washington to design the capital city, was a known member of Masonic circles. And when you look at his original street grid from above, from a bird's eye view, the geometry is startling. The street arrangement around the White House, particularly when Pennsylvania Avenue, New Hampshire Avenue, K Street, Rhode Island Avenue, and Massachusetts Avenue are traced together, forms a near-perfect Masonic compass and square. The Capitol building sits at the base of a Masonic right triangle. The Washington Monument, completed in 1884, stands 555 feet tall, a number with deep resonance in the Masonic and Pythagorean traditions, representing the sacred relationship between height and proportion in ancient architecture. The Washington Monument itself is unmistakably an obelisk, a form that dates back to ancient Egypt, considered in Masonic tradition to represent the phallus of the god Osiris and the eternal flame of enlightened knowledge reaching toward the heavens. It is, in a very direct sense, a monument not merely to George Washington the man, but to a set of ancient philosophical beliefs about light, knowledge, and order. And then there is the Capitol building itself. In the center of the dome, the great fresco painted by Constantino Brumidi in 1865 sits the Apotheosis of Washington. Apotheosis. The word means the transformation of a human being into a god. In this painting, Washington is seated among the clouds, robed not as a president or general, but as a deity. Around him circle 13 maidens representing the 13 original states and various Roman gods. Minerva, goddess of wisdom. Neptune, god of the sea. Vulcan, god of fire and invention. Mercury, god of commerce. The entire ceiling of the nation's legislature is a scene of divine transformation. The mortal made immortal, the man made myth. Was this simply artistic tradition? Perhaps. The classical style was enormously fashionable in 18th century intellectual circles. Or perhaps it was something more deliberate, a statement, coded in marble and paint and gold, about what the founders believed they were creating. Not merely a country, a new order, a new age, a civilization shaped by an ancient philosophy of light against darkness, reason against superstition, liberty against tyranny. Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages. Whether you find this inspiring or unsettling may depend entirely on who you are and what you believe. But the symbols are real. The connections are real. And whatever their ultimate meaning, they speak to a truth that the Founding Fathers themselves would likely admit, that the United States of America was built not just with timber and iron and the sweat of 1 million ordinary people, but with ideas. Powerful, ancient, extraordinary ideas. And those ideas are still watching us from the back of every dollar bill we carry in our pockets. Chapter 3. The Phantom Ship. The Mary Celeste and the Atlantic's greatest ghost story. There is a particular kind of mystery that the ocean creates, one that no land can replicate, because the sea keeps its secrets beneath fathoms of dark, cold, indifferent water. And sometimes, the sea returns a secret to the surface, but only halfway, leaving just enough evidence to be maddening. On the 4th of December, 1872, The British brigantine Dei Gratia was sailing steadily eastward through the Atlantic, about 600 miles west of Portugal, when her lookout spotted something strange. A ship drifting. She was a two-masted brigantine, an American merchant vessel called the Mary Celeste. She was moving erratically, slowly, in a way that immediately told the experienced sailors aboard the Dei Gratia that something was wrong. Her sails were partially set. She was not flying a flag of distress. And yet she moved like a ship without purpose, like a ship without a crew. Captain David Morehouse recognized the Mary Celeste immediately. He had met her captain, Benjamin Briggs, just a week before in New York City. The two had shared a meal together. Morehouse knew Briggs to be a serious, experienced, deeply sober man, a dedicated Christian who did not even allow alcohol aboard his vessel. He sent a small boarding party across. What they found aboard the Mary Celeste was, and this word is not used lightly, impossible. The ship was completely, utterly abandoned. Not a single soul remained. And yet everything else was in its place. The cargo hold contained 1,701 barrels of commercial alcohol, perfectly intact, untouched. The crew's quarters held personal belongings, clothing neatly folded, boots lined up by bunks, pipes half smoked, sewing materials laid out as if the seamstress had simply stepped away. Captain Briggs's cabin told its own quiet story. His wife's harmonium, a small portable organ, sat open with a piece of music still propped on its stand. His daughter Sophia's toys were scattered on the floor, exactly as a 2-year-old's toys always are. His navigation books were open on the table. The last entry in the ship's log was dated November 25th, 10 days before the discovery. The ship's position at that time had been logged as approximately 400 miles from where she was found, meaning she had sailed, largely unmanned, for at least 400 miles through open Atlantic waters. The ship's one lifeboat was missing. There were no signs of violence, no blood, no damaged furniture, no indication of mutiny or struggle. The food stores were ample. The pump showed only a minor amount of water in the hold, not enough to cause any serious concern, certainly not enough to justify abandoning a seaworthy vessel. Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, his daughter Sophia, and 7 crew members had simply ceased to exist. The subsequent investigation by the British Vice Admiralty Court in Gibraltar generated enormous public fascination and almost no answers. The Board of Inquiry noted the extraordinary and baffling nature of the case and could reach no definitive conclusion about what had caused the crew to abandon ship. Theories. There are so many theories. Piracy was considered and largely dismissed. Nothing of value had been taken. Mutiny was examined, but there was absolutely no evidence of conflict, and no motive could be established among a crew Briggs had personally selected for their reliability. A waterspout, a marine tornado, was proposed, perhaps triggering panic without causing structural damage. A submarine seismic event, known as a seaquake, could theoretically have caused sudden violent shaking, convincing the crew the ship was breaking apart when it was not. The most scientifically credible modern theory involves the cargo itself. The 1,701 barrels of commercial alcohol were of a particularly volatile type, and when inspectors opened the hold after the discovery, they found 9 barrels had leaked. The theory suggests that a buildup of invisible, odorless alcohol vapor in the hold could have triggered a low-pressure explosion, a sudden, violent, but flameless blast that blew open the hatch covers sent a terrifying concussion through the ship and convinced Briggs and his crew that the vessel was about to explode catastrophically. In a panicked attempt to wait at a safe distance while the fumes cleared, they may have boarded the lifeboat attached by a tow rope to the Mary Celeste, only to have that rope snap in the Atlantic swell, leaving them adrift in the open ocean with no provisions and no way back. The Atlantic would have done the rest. Benjamin Briggs was 37 years old. His wife Sarah was 30. Their daughter, Sophia Matilda, was 2 years and 3 months old. With her whole life ahead of her, her toys still scattered on the floor of a cabin that drifted, silent and waiting. Across thousands of miles of ocean, they were never found. The Mary Celeste herself went on to sail for 12 more years under various owners, a fact that strikes many as quietly, disturbingly wrong, like a person who goes on living after something essential has been taken from them. She was eventually deliberately wrecked in 1885 on the reefs of Haiti by her final captain in an insurance fraud scheme. She sank, and the Atlantic, which had already taken so much from her, took the rest. Chapter 4: The Underground Railroad. The Secret Geography of Freedom. Not all of America's hidden histories are cold mysteries. Some of them are stories of extraordinary human courage, stories that were kept secret not to conceal shame, but to protect the sacred. Stories that were whispered in the dark, because the dark was the only safe place to speak them. This is one of those stories. The Underground Railroad was not a railroad. There were no tracks, no locomotives, no station platforms. It was something far more remarkable. A living, breathing, constantly shifting human network of safe houses, secret routes, coded signals, and extraordinary risk, stretching from the deep south all the way to the free states of the north, and beyond, into Canada. And for decades, it existed in the shadows of a country that officially pretended it did not exist at all. The system that would come to be called the Underground Railroad grew slowly and organically through the late 18th and early 19th centuries, shaped by the sheer desperate need of the men and women enslaved on the plantations of the American South. It had no central organization, no headquarters, no official membership roles. It was a network built entirely on trust and on the knowledge that the wrong words spoken to the wrong person could mean capture, torture, or death. The conductors, those who guided freedom seekers along the routes, were some of the most remarkable human beings in American history. Among them, none shone brighter than Harriet Tubman. Born Araminta Ross around 1822 on a plantation in Maryland, she had endured a childhood of profound brutality. As a teenager, she suffered a severe head injury when an overseer threw a 2-pound lead weight at another enslaved person and struck her instead. For the rest of her life, she would suffer from sudden, uncontrollable episodes of deep sleep narcoleptic seizures that could overtake her without warning. She had no choice but to learn to live with the terrifying possibility that she might fall unconscious at any moment. In 1849, hearing rumors that she and her brothers were to be sold further south, deeper into the most brutal regions of the cotton and sugar economy, Harriet made a decision that would change history. She would run. She traveled at night. She followed the North Star. She waded through swamps and rivers. She hid in attics, beneath floorboards, in haystacks and wagon beds. She walked nearly 90 miles in the dark, guided by the kindness of strangers she had been told to trust by people she trusted with her life. She made it to Philadelphia. She stood on the free soil of Pennsylvania and felt what freedom felt like for the first time in her life. And then she did something that no one could have asked of her. Something that required a courage beyond most human comprehension. She went back. Again and again and again. In the next decade, Harriet Tubman made approximately 13 missions into slave territory and personally guided around 70 enslaved people to freedom. She carried a revolver, not only for protection against slave catchers, but for another, darker purpose. If any freedom seeker panicked and threatened to turn back, endangering the entire group, she would press the cold metal against their temple and whisper, "You'll be free or die." She never lost a single passenger. The routes of the Underground Railroad were protected by a sophisticated system of codes and signals that only those within the network understood. Quilts specifically, certain patterns are believed by many historians to have been hung on fences and clotheslines along known routes, their patterns communicating information about safe houses, water crossings, and directions north. A quilt with a bear's paw pattern meant follow the mountains. A flying geese pattern meant follow the birds north. A North Star pattern meant navigate by the sky. The language was everywhere and invisible to those who did not know how to read it. Safe houses were known as stations. Those who ran them were station masters. The freedom seekers themselves were sometimes called passengers or, more poetically, cargo. Frederick Douglass kept a station in his home in Rochester, New York. Levi Coffin, a Quaker from Indiana who helped more than 3,000 people escape to freedom, was known as the president of the Underground Railroad. The network stretched through Ohio and Indiana, through Pennsylvania and New York, following the rivers and the forests, and the hidden kindness of thousands of ordinary people, black and white, Quaker and Methodist, farmer and shopkeeper who looked at the law of their land and decided, quietly and at great personal risk, that this particular law was not one they were willing to obey. In all, historians estimate that between 30,000 and 100,000 enslaved people found freedom through the Underground Railroad between the 1780s and the beginning of the Civil War in 1861. The precise routes, safe houses, and methods remain only partially known to us because, by design, nothing was written down. The entire system existed in memory and trust, and much of it died with the people who carried it. The secrecy that kept it alive also ensured that history would never fully recover it. But the stars that guided those travelers north are still in the sky. And somewhere, in the DNA of millions of Americans, is the inheritance of those midnight journeys, the memory of feet moving silently through dark forests toward a light that the law said they had no right to reach for, but that something far older than any law told them was rightfully theirs. Chapter 5: The Confederacy's Lost Gold. The Mystery That Never Ended. The Civil War ended on April 9th, 1865, when General Robert E. Lee laid down his sword at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. But the end of a war does not always mean the end of its secrets. And in the final, desperate weeks of the Confederacy, one of the greatest treasure mysteries in American history was set into motion. At the beginning of April 1865, as Union General William Tecumseh Sherman marched his armies northward through the Carolinas and Ulysses S. Grant's forces closed in on Richmond, Virginia, the Confederate capital. Confederate President Jefferson Davis received the news he had long been dreading. Richmond had to be evacuated. On the night of April 2nd, Jefferson Davis and his cabinet fled the burning city by train. But they did not leave empty-handed. they took with them the entire treasury of the Confederate States of America. Exactly how much gold was in that treasury has been debated by historians for more than 150 years. Contemporary estimates place the figure somewhere between $500,000 and $2 million in gold and silver coin and bullion equivalent. By modern calculations, to somewhere between $15 million and $60 million in today's value. Some accounts, colored by wartime desperation and rumor, place the sum much higher. The treasure train moved south through the Carolinas into Georgia. At each stop, portions of the treasury were reportedly dispersed soldiers' back pay, payments to local Confederate officials, contributions to various state governments that were themselves collapsing. The paper trail, such as it existed, grows thin and contradictory. By the time Davis was captured by Union cavalry near Irwinville, Georgia, on May 10th, almost exactly a month after Lee's surrender, the exact whereabouts of the remaining Confederate gold had become genuinely uncertain. And in that uncertainty, legend was born. The most dramatic of the Confederate gold theories concerns a cache believed to have been hidden near Washington, Georgia, a small town that served as one of the final stopping points of the fleeing Confederate government. According to various accounts, as the treasure train paused there, a significant portion of gold, some accounts say $100,000, others say hundreds of thousands, was either buried by Confederate soldiers for safekeeping or entrusted to local civilians for protection, with the intention of recovery when the war ended. It was never recovered. The custodians of that gold, if they existed, either died before they could retrieve it or took the secret with them to their graves rather than surrender it to the Union. Treasure hunters have searched the forests and fields around Washington, Georgia for generations. Metal detectors have swept the soil. Old maps and diaries have been studied and restudied. To this day, no confirmed cache of Confederate gold has ever been found. There is another thread to this story, darker, stranger, more conspiratorial. The Knights of the Golden Circle was a secret society founded in the 1850s with a vision of a vast slave-holding empire stretching from the American South through the Caribbean and deep into Central and South America, a circle of territory drawn around the Gulf of Mexico, with Havana as its center. The KGC, as it was known, recruited extensively before and during the Civil War, and was believed to include among its members some of the most powerful and dangerous men in the Confederacy. According to legends that have persisted since the end of the war, legends taken seriously enough by some historians to warrant careful examination, the Knights of the Golden Circle did not simply dissolve when the Confederacy fell. They went underground, and they took the gold with them. The theory suggests that strategic caches of Confederate treasure were hidden across the southern and western United States in Missouri, Arkansas, Texas, Kansas, and elsewhere, guarded by coded maps and Masonic-style cryptographic clues, waiting for the day when the Confederacy would rise again. That hidden treasure, the theory holds, was used for decades to fund guerrilla resistance to Reconstruction, to finance the activities of outlaws and former Confederate officers who refused to accept defeat, and to sustain the dream of a second Confederacy that never came. Jesse James, the famous outlaw whose gang terrorized the Missouri-Kansas border country for years after the Civil War, was, according to several serious researchers, including author Jesse Lee James III, who claimed to be his great-great-nephew, a member of the Knights of the Golden Circle and a guardian of their treasure caches. James was assassinated in 1882, and researchers claim he died with the secrets of multiple hidden gold caches on his lips. No KGC treasure has ever been officially confirmed, but the maps and coded stones that were allegedly left as markers have surfaced repeatedly over the years in old farmsteads and along riverbanks across the South. Whether they are genuine artifacts of a secret society's long game or elaborate hoaxes created over the generations by clever con artists and wishful dreamers, remains one of the most delightful open questions of American history. The gold is out there somewhere, perhaps in a field in Georgia, beneath 160 years of red clay and kudzu, perhaps in a limestone cave in Missouri, sealed with a carved stone that looks like nothing more than a curious local rock formation to anyone who does not know what they are looking for. Perhaps it has already been quietly found by someone who had the wisdom or the greed to keep the discovery entirely to themselves. The Confederacy lost the war, but somewhere, if the legends are right, it still holds its treasure. Chapter 6. The Philadelphia Experiment. The night a ship disappeared. October 1943. The Second World War is at its midpoint. The Atlantic Ocean is a killing ground. German U-boats are hunting Allied supply convoys with terrifying efficiency, sinking ships by the dozen, strangling the vital supply lines that keep Britain alive and the Allied war effort moving. The United States Navy is desperate for any technological edge that might turn the tide. And in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, according to one of the most extraordinary and disputed claims in the history of American military research, that edge was nearly found. The legend of the Philadelphia experiment begins with a man named Carlos Allende, also known as Carl M. Allen, a merchant marine sailor who claimed to have witnessed, from the deck of his own ship, something that should have been physically impossible. According to Allende, on the night of October 28, 1943, the USS Eldridge, a newly commissioned destroyer escort, was subjected to an experimental electromagnetic invisibility field generated by powerful generators installed aboard the ship by the United States Navy's Office of Naval Research. The technology, Allende claimed, was based on a unified field theory developed by Albert Einstein during his work in the 1930s, a theory that Einstein had subsequently suppressed because its implications were too dangerous. And the experiment, according to Allende, worked. The USS Eldridge, all 1,240 tons of her, vanished from the Philadelphia harbor in a flash of green-blue light. And then, seconds later, or perhaps minutes, she appeared in the harbor of Norfolk, Virginia, 200 miles away. And then she returned to Philadelphia. The crew, Allende claimed, suffered catastrophically. Some men went mad. Others were found partially fused with the metal of the ship's hull, their bodies merged with steel in a way that physics insists is impossible. Some crew members reportedly disappeared entirely and were never seen again. Others appeared and disappeared intermittently for years afterward, flickering in and out of reality like bad radio signals. The United States Navy has denied every element of this story completely and consistently. The official records show the USS Eldridge was not even in Philadelphia on October 28, 1943. She was in New York. Carlos Allende's claims were widely denounced as fabrications by the scientific community, and no credible evidence of an electromagnetic invisibility experiment has ever surfaced in declassified military documents. And yet, the story persists. It has persisted for more than 80 years, fueled by the fundamental human suspicion that governments do not tell us everything, that military research operates in shadows, and that the desperate urgency of wartime creates an environment where the unthinkable becomes thinkable. The US government's wartime research capabilities were, after all, extraordinary and sometimes genuinely frightening. The Manhattan Project, the secret program that built the atomic bomb, was a project so vast and so carefully concealed that the Vice President of the United States did not know it existed. Thousands of scientists and workers kept it secret for years. If an atomic bomb could be developed in secret, what else might have been attempted? The Office of Scientific Research and Development, created in 1941 under Vannevar Bush, oversaw an enormous range of classified research programs: radar, sonar, exotic fuels, biological weapons, psychological warfare. Many of those programs remained classified for decades. Some remain partially classified today. The true basis for the Philadelphia experiment legend may lie in something far more mundane but fascinating in its own right. The Navy was, in fact, conducting serious research during the war into degaussing a real technology that involves wrapping a ship in electromagnetic cables to neutralize its magnetic signature, making it invisible to German magnetic mines. This technology was real. It was in use. And to a casual observer standing on the deck of a nearby ship, watching powerful electromagnetic equipment at work on a vessel, it might have given rise to interesting stories. But the Philadelphia experiment has grown far beyond degaussing. It has become a mythology, a modern American myth about science and secrecy and the terrifying possibility that somewhere in a government building in Philadelphia in 1943, someone looked at the laws of physics and decided to see what happened if you broke them. We still do not know what they found. Chapter 7: The Sodder Children. The fire that didn't burn. Some mysteries are not about nations or wars or lost treasure. Some mysteries are about a family, a Christmas Eve, a fire that changed everything, and a grief that lasted a lifetime. On the night of December 24th, 1945, in Fayetteville, West Virginia, the Sodder family went to bed in their home with the warmth of Christmas Eve around them. George Sodder, an Italian immigrant who had built a successful trucking business, and his wife Jenny had 10 children. That night, 5 of them, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, were sleeping upstairs. At around 1 in the morning, the house caught fire. George and Jenny escaped with their other 5 children. But when George went back into the burning house to find the 5 children who were still inside, he could not reach them. He tried to pull a ladder from the side of the house to climb to the upper floor windows. The ladder was not where he had left it. He tried to start his trucks to drive them beneath the windows, and climb up the engines would not start, despite having worked perfectly the previous day. Neighbors came. The fire department took more than an hour to arrive, extraordinary, considering that the town's fire station was only 2 miles away. By the time they did, the house had burned almost completely to the ground. And here is where the mystery truly begins. When investigators searched the ruins, they did not find the bodies of the 5 children. Not the bones, not the teeth, not the metal belt buckle of any of the children's clothing, nothing. In a fire that burned a wooden house in a matter of hours, there was simply no evidence that 5 human children had ever existed in that space. Investigators declared the children dead, consumed by the fire, but George and Jenny Sodder refused to believe it. A fire intense enough to completely obliterate 5 human bodies, they argued, would have needed to burn at temperatures far higher than any ordinary house fire, higher, in fact, than a cremation furnace. And a cremation furnace, set to temperatures far above those of a house fire, still leaves behind bones and teeth. A house fire simply does not destroy a human body entirely. The Sodders spent the rest of their lives and significant portions of their modest income searching for their children. They hired private investigators. They followed leads across the country. For decades, they kept a large billboard in front of their rebuilt home, showing photographs of the 5 children and the words, "Do you know what happened to us?" Over the years, there were sightings, credible ones. A woman in a hotel in Salinas, California in 1949 reported seeing a group of children matching the Sodders' descriptions, accompanied by adults who became agitated when she tried to speak to the children. In 1967, a woman who identified herself only as Anne wrote to the Sodder family with a photograph of a young man she believed was Louis Sodder, older now, but unmistakably matching his childhood photograph. The letter was postmarked from Central City, Kentucky. George Sodder died in 1969, still searching. Jenny continued until her own death in 1989. The Fayetteville Fire Department lost the evidence from the case. No formal reinvestigation was ever conducted with the rigor the case deserved. The 5 children were never found. And the mystery of what happened on Christmas Eve in a small West Virginia town in 1945 remains one of the most haunting, heartbreaking, and thoroughly unresolved cold cases in American history. What George Sodder suspected, and what some researchers have since examined carefully, was that the fire was not an accident at all, that it was set, that his children were taken, not burned, that there were people who wanted to silence him for reasons connected to his vocal criticism of Benito Mussolini before and during the war, or for other reasons entirely that have never been fully established. Whether that is true, or whether the fire was simply a devastating accident and the children's remains somehow overlooked in the investigation, we cannot say with certainty. What we know is this: 5 children went to sleep on Christmas Eve, 1945. And in the morning, they were gone. And no one has ever been able to explain, to the satisfaction of anyone who looks closely at the evidence, exactly where they went. The history of the United States is not a single story. It is 10,000 stories, layered over one another like geological strata, each era pressing down on the one beneath it, the oldest buried deepest. The pressure of time transforming everything above into something harder and stranger than it began as. The official history, the one in the textbooks, the one taught in classrooms, the one recited on national holidays is true, but it is not complete. It cannot be. No history ever is. Beneath the official version lies the other America, the one that moves at night, that hides in codes and carvings and quilts, that vanishes from harbors in flashes of green-blue light, that buries its gold in clay soil and trusts the trees to keep its secrets. The America that built its capital city in the shape of ancient symbols, that launched experiments too dangerous to name, that lost its children to fires that didn't burn hot enough, that carved one word into a post at the edge of a forest and walked away into the dark. These mysteries are not failures of history. They are its most honest passages, the places where the neat narrative of progress and destiny cracks open to reveal the raw, strange, uncertain humanity underneath. The people who vanished from Roanoke were not symbols of colonial ambition. They were a family, a community. People with names and dreams and fears and perhaps the extraordinary courage to build a new life among strangers. The freedom seekers of the Underground Railroad were not footnotes. They were the living proof of something that the Declaration of Independence promised, but the law refused to deliver, and they decided, in the dark, to close that gap themselves. The children whose names were carved on a billboard in West Virginia were not a cold case file. They were loved. History is always, at its core, about people, about the individual heartbeat inside the great sweep of events. And the mysteries, the vanishings, and the secrets and the codes are the places where history reminds us that it was always made by human beings. Complicated, frightened, brave, foolish, visionary, broken, and searching human beings, just like us. So as you drift now, gently, into sleep, let these stories carry you. Let them settle into whatever quiet part of your mind receives the old things, the deep things, the things that matter not because they were resolved, but because they were real. The United States of America is a young country with an ancient soul. It was built on the bones of mysteries, the dreams of visionaries, the courage of the forgotten, and the hunger of those who believe always that something more is possible. The story is not finished. It never is. Good night.